This is all 3DMax, and today I'm going to demonstrate a few techniques for creating this basic rope shape. These techniques can also be used in other models that you might be working with. Now I've got pre-made this texture of some rope fibers, which I'm going to use as the texture. Now I've made this seamless so that it can be tiled, and I'm going to feature this on my website if you'd like to use this. I'm going to start by going into the Autodesk 3D Studio Max program, and under the Create and the Geometry tab, switch from the standard primitives to the dynamic objects and click onto Spring. And in the top viewport, just draw in a basic spring like this. I'm going to switch over to the Move tool and up the top here to Modify, and I'm going to adjust the parameters of the spring. Now I've got this set to meters. If you go to Customize and Unit Setup, you can switch to metric, and from the drop down list select meters. And I'm going to create this rope 10 meters in length with a diameter of 0.05 meters. Turns I'm going to set to 25. Just expand this window a bit. So 25 turns, and segments I'll set to 80. I'm sorry, set this to 20. The diameter I'll keep to 0.05 and the sides set to 8. Now the settings I'm trying to achieve here is to get all the faces to be pretty much even squares throughout the object, so that it gives a nice smooth surface. Now switching to a front viewport, pressing F3 will turn the wireframe on and off, so shaded mode to wireframe, and F4 will allow you to switch to a shaded and a wireframe mode. So with the wireframe and the shaded mode, I'm just going to select the spring that we've created and shift and drag this up so that it just meets here. So the bottom is meeting with the original spring. I'll make this a different color to make it a little bit easier to see. You can see that it's meeting here, there. So what I'll do is I'll select my original spring, right click, convert it to an editable poly, switch to a polygon mode, and I'm just going to select the bottom face here and click onto Grow up to where it meets. Then I'll do Control I to invert my selection and press Delete to delete that. I'll delete this copy as well, and I'll also delete this bottom face here, leaving me with just this tube, which is going to be the foundation for the rope. But I want to start with a real basic shape here and apply the texture to it. From the Modify list, go to the drop down list and click on to Unwrap UVW to add that to your stack. Expand the list and click onto Edge, and with the wireframe visible, click onto one of the edges and click onto Loop, and it should loop from the bottom all the way up to the top. I'm just going to press J to turn off this bounding box, and with this edge selected, if I scroll through my unwrap parameters, there's an option here, Edge Selection to Seams, and I'm going to click this, and it's now created a seam which we can identify by this blue line, and that's now replaced that red line, that edge selection. Now with this seam I can switch to a face mode, Control A to select all the faces, and I'll click on to Pelt, and it will give you the Edit UVW window with this Pelt Tool here. Now what the Pelt Tool does is it takes your object and it will pull the object apart, breaking it at the seam that we created. So you won't be able to come into here unless you've set up a seam. I can click onto the stretcher, which is this outer circle, and clicking on select stretcher has selected this outer circle. I can click onto the scale tool and I can scale this larger or smaller, or I can rotate. If I click on to select the pelt UVs, it will select the vertices on the actual object, and I can click on to start pelt. And what it's doing is it's pulling this model apart following these guides in this pelt circle. Now it's going to continue to do that until I click stop pelt. So I'll click stop and I'll go to select the stretcher and I'll make this a little bigger. I'll just turn off the grid, make it a little easier to see, and I'll run select the pelt UVs again and I'll go start pelt. You can see it's pulling it apart, making it closer to the actual shape. So I'll expand this a little more. Okay, so it's not actually changing the shape now, it's just making it larger. So what I can do is I can click on to relax, and it's now starting to relax it more to the shape of the actual object itself, but in a flat 2D map. Now I'm pretty happy with this. This is all I need the Pelt tool to do, so I'm going to commit to this change, and there's my unwrapped tube cylinder. Now I'm just going to rotate this, and I'm going to flatten all these edges. Now if you've seen other videos of mine, you'll know that I've got this plugin, which is the Unwrap Tools maxscript version 1.60, and it's got a really good tool that I use quite often. The align tools, which allows you to align in the U, V and UV directions. Now it doesn't give you the facilities to do hotkeys, which I find very useful, so I've actually created a little hotkey max script which I'm going to show you how to add, and you can access this from my website. It's just this script here. It's called ttkeys.ms, and what it does is I've pretty much taken the information from here, just these three buttons here, and put them into a max script file so I can set up a hotkey for them. So to add that, you click on to customize, you click on to max script and you click on to run script. Select the ttkeys.ms and click on to open. Now when you do that, it's going to copy all the macro scripts into this folder here, which in Windows Vista and Windows 7 will be under users, so users and then your username, app data, local, Autodesk, 3DSMax, and then whatever version you're running, then English, user interface, and then user macros. With Windows XP, it will go to your documents and settings, your username, local settings, application data, Autodesk, etc., etc. So if you do want to uninstall this, you just need to come into this folder and delete these files. So I'll select this file, and if I have a look now, it's added these macros to this folder. So if I wanted to uninstall this, I can just select these files and delete them. Now that they've been installed, I can go up to the customize and customize the user interface, and under the category, if I scroll down to T, we can see now it's got the TT key. And I've got the options here, unwrap align U and unwrap align V, which I'm going to set up a hotkey now. So align U, I'll set as Alt 1 and assign, and Alt 2 for align V. And now that they've been set up, I can quickly come through here and hotkey all these edges. Now hotkeys are really handy in 3D Studio Max, especially when you're doing a lot of repetitive tasks. It can be quite tedious to move your mouse left and right non-stop doing lots of things like this. Even such a very simple shape like this, it's still quite a tedious task. Now you don't always have to straighten your model like this. I do this quite often to make it easier to modify if I need to come back in. Plus it's all going to line up with the material that I've created. Now I didn't have to use the Pelt Tool to unwrap this, but I thought it would be something different to include in this tutorial that you might find useful for other projects that you might be working on. And the green is indicating that this is an open edge. But with this particular model we don't have to break and stitch anything together. So now that this is all straight, I'm going to apply the material to it. So I'm going to open up the material editor. In the first material slot I'm going to click onto the box next to diffuse, click onto new, select bitmap and select my rope texture, go up to the parent, enable two-sided material and click on show the material in the viewport, and I'll drag the material onto the spring that we've created. If I go back to the edit window and show the material in the viewport, if it's not showing, go to pick texture, select scene, and you can switch to this mode and select your material. And at the bottom you can expand the options and tick tiling and set this up and see how it's being tiled. And I can move this around depending on how I want my material to be shown on the spring. If I click on F2 it will hide this red shaded face, and we can see the material updating on the object. I can also scale this down make the strands a little larger, or I can scale it higher and make it a little smaller, depending on what I'm after. I like that, and I'm going to leave it like that. And I'll collapse this down by right clicking and going collapse all. And this is the basic shape that I'm after. I'll switch to edge mode and go to a front viewport, and I'm just going to shift and drag this up. We can see that the material is actually following, and it will continue to do that throughout the spring. Now I'm going to create an array, so I'll zoom right in, go Tools, and Array. And I'm going to start with just 2 counts, switch to Copy, and enable the preview. And I'll just move the move this up in the y-axis. And I'll set that to 0.4 meters. And now I'll create 50 of these. And this is the first part of the rope object that I'm going to create. Now it's created copies, so each of these are separate. So I'll select my original and click the box next to attach, and I'll select all the additional copies and attach them. Then I'll go to a vertex mode and Control A to select all the vertices. It's 8,400 vertices currently, and I'll click onto the box next to Weld and set this to just 0, 1. We can see it's got currently 8,400 vertices, and after the weld it's going to have 8,008, so it's going to reduce this by 392. So I click OK. I'll undo that. Sorry, it's 0.01 is what I was after. Press OK. And that's attached everything. So if I click onto border and do Control A, the only thing that should be selected is this edge and the one at the top. Okay. In the front viewport, I'm just going to go back to the bottom, press J to turn off this bounding box. I'm just going to shift and drag this up like this, and shift and drag it up once more. And this is the rope shape that I'm after. Depending on the type of rope that you'd like to create, you can also attach these. So I'll grab my original and I'll attach these to copies that I've just created, and I can just shift and drag to make a copy, and I can mirror this with the default settings, the x-axis and no clone. Press OK. I can bring this up like this, depending on the type of rope material that you're after. Maybe hair, something like that. So I'll delete this, and for the ends I'm going to select border and select the bottom border here like this, and clicking onto Control, I'm going to click onto Polygon, which has switched my selection from the border to a polygon selection, and then I'm just going to grow this until it's just past this border here, and then collapse, giving me this point. I'm going to repeat that to this here, and also this one here, but only do this one too. Okay, so I've got these 3 points where I've collapsed the border, And I'm just going to select these 3 points, and I'm just going to click X, Y, and Z to align them all together, creating this point like this. Then I'll drag it up, and I'll switch to an edge mode and select these edges here, just one on each of the spring ends, and I'll click onto loop and then chamfer, and I'll chamfer at 0.05 like this, just to give it a rounded edge. I'll go to polygon, Control A to select everything, and I'm going to click onto Triangulate, which is going to adjust the faces based on this new shape that I've created to see if it's working out this face a little easier. Best way to understand that, if I right click and go to Object Properties and untick Edges Only, you can see that each of these faces is made up of triangles. If I click on to Retriangulate, you can see that some of these triangles have actually flipped, making the shape better suit the positioning that I have these in. So I'll click Retriangulate. I'll go back to Object Properties and enable Edges Only, which will hide the triangular edges. And then I'll click onto, I want the IDs just set to 1, but I'll clear all the smoothing groups and just set it to 1. And that's just the end that I'm doing here. I'll repeat the steps with the top. Now I'm pressing collapse twice because with the top, for some reason, it's not collapsing at all to one point. So I'll do it twice, and now it has. Okay, I'll select all points. All 3 vertices are selected, and align them to the X, Y, and Z, and bring this down. Click onto Edge and select these edges here, and the chamfer will still be set to 0.05, so press OK. I'll go to Polygon, Control A, and Retriangulate, and we should see that some of these will switch, and I'll make sure the smoothing group is set to 1 for everything. And that's the basic shape for the robe. Now that we've got our basic robe created, we can now start to manipulate this into a shape that we're after for our scene. And to do that, I'm going to create some splines, and I'm going to path deform the rope to the splines. I'll start by going over to the Create tab and selecting Shapes and clicking onto Line. And in the front viewport, I'll press G to hide my grid, but I'll just start to draw in a line. If I click and hold, it'll create this bezier rounded edge. And right click to finish creating that shape. And what I'm going to do is I'll just create a plane, I'll move this back, And I'm just going to create just some rings as a guide for this spline that I've just created. So what I can do is I'll grab my original rope, and I can see that the pivot is down the bottom. Now for this next step, the pivot needs to be centered to the object. So to reset the pivot, I'll go up to the Hierarchy tab, click onto Effect Pivot Only, and center the pivot to the object, and it's now moved it to the middle. I'll unselect Effect Pivot Only, and I'll go up to the Modify tab, and from the Modify list I'm going to select pathdeform WSM, which doesn't have the ability to mess around with gizmos. Instead, it's got an option here, Move to Path. The other option that I'm referring to is simply called pathdeform, which doesn't have the option to move to path. Instead, you can switch to the gizmo and move the gizmo around in order to position your object to whatever you've got it aligned to. So I'll go to the pathdeform WSM, and I'm going to pick the spline as my path, and I'll move my object to the path. Actually, before I do that, I'll create a copy. I'll pick this spline, move to path. You can see that the rope has now moved to the path of the spline, and I can use the percentage to follow this all the way through. I'll move this background forward a little bit. And I can click onto the spline itself, and I can start to manipulate this. So I'll convert this to a bezier corner, and set this to a bezier corner. And you can see that as I move this, it's also manipulating the rope because it's following the path. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but I'm just trying to highlight the point that you can modify the rope just by using the pathdeform and having it following a path like a spline. I'll add another point to this spline by refining it. I'll just hide the rope. So you can do something like this, and you can continue to adjust the percent. You can also scale this a little larger depending on the size that you're after. and you can always cut those edges and cap them like we did just a moment ago. But there's other shapes that you can do. You can create splines off almost any geometry. If I go to the extended primitives under the Create and Geometry tab, and I'll create a torus knot, and I'll switch and convert it to an editable poly, and I'll grab one of these edges and loop it, which has followed it all the way around, and I'll click onto Create Shape from the selection, and I'll leave it to smooth, and I can delete this torus knot, and it's now got this spline created easily from that shape. I'll shift and drag to create a copy, pathdeform, and I'll pick the path and move to the path. Now we need a lot more rope to fill this up, so I will scale it. And then I can join these seams together depending on what I want to do. But you can create almost any geometry and use the create shape from object tool. The other option is a helix. I'll create a cylinder first, and in the top viewport I'll draw in a cylinder. And I'll create, under the Create Shapes, click onto Helix, and in the top viewport I'll just create the helix. I'm just going to shift and drag this over and make a copy, but I'll copy my original rope, add the path deform WSM, pick the path to the helix, move to path, and then I'll click onto the helix and I'll start to adjust the parameters of that. And I'm just going to scale this higher. And adjust the percent. I'll select my helix, give it some more turns and height. So depending what you're after, you can manipulate it quite easily. And I'll add the path deform to the rope, pick the helix, move to path. I'll scale this up a little bit. Select the helix, give it a 0 radius to start off with. I'll give it some turns. Adjust the percent. I'll scale this up. So depending on what you're after, there's quite a lot of things that you can use this for. You don't necessarily have to use a rope, you can create any shape that you like. I'm just using a rope as a demonstration, as it's something I've had to model recently for another project. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You can use this for whatever you like. Hope this helped. Thanks.